Alright, so this is going to be part 3 to What If Deku Had Divine Dividing. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
They took it to 10.
Let me tell you how I come through with the 1-2, kicking shit like kung fu. Treat a bad bitch like she average. I'm a savage, little hoe, what you want do? I'm about cash if the raw fast. I'ma get that little nigga by any means.
Alright, so our actual What If would start a little bit after the part where he got both boosted gears, or I guess it would be the next day. And this would be, the part where Deku would be walking to school. And this is when the media is actually outside of UA. So that's what's happening at this point. And Deku would try to get through the kind of crowd, and they would ask him, the reporters there would ask him about All Might and how he is as a teacher, since he is the #1 hero, so they would want to know. So what Deku would do in this scenario was he would just give them kind of straightforward answers, not really telling them much. And since it's not really much that interesting, they would kind of leave him alone. The same thing would happen to Ida, since again he's also very straightforward about his answering. So they would get into class, and Aizawa would tell him that they're actually going to the USJ, which is the place where they teach him about kind of rescue heroes and things like that, rescue situations. So later on into the day, they would go to lunch, right? And this is when they think that there's some sort of villain attack, since the alarms were tripped off, I think. And yeah, they basically think this, and it still goes the same way as in canon, where everyone kind of rushes to that kind of hallway, right? And Ida basically gets everyone's attention to kind of calm them down, right? And I would also like to add this kind of part to it. Last time I asked you guys what I should name the balance breaker and what I should call the dragons. And there was two kind of main things. There was vanishing Welsh dragon, and then Welsh vanishing dragon. So they're basically the same name. It's just that one is switched for the other. So I'll have a poll on this video, and I'll tell you, or ask you guys which one you prefer. Also, since it's a mixture of both boosted gear, I would believe the color would change. So I think it would be the boosted gear, or not boosted gear, the balance breaker. The balance breaker would look a little bit different than it does normally, since it's a mixture of both red or crimson and white or silver. Those are the main colors that they're described as. So I think it'd be kind of like a pinkish purple kind of look to it. I'll probably have a picture up on screen if I remember. So yeah, after this ordeal with the media and people finding out that it was the media and not some sort of villain attack, they would get back into class. And this would be around the same time when, or it'd be the time where Aizawa would, get the kids ready to go to the USJ, and everyone would pack their hero costumes, and so would Deku, since in this one he didn't get his hero costume ruined during the fight. So yeah, that's kind of how it would be. And Deku would use his role as the representative to kind of get everyone into kind of order and get them on the bus, kind of how Ida does in the anime, right? Since Deku has to kind of step up and take that position, since Ida is no longer the representative in this one. After everyone would get onto the bus, this is when Suyu or Froppy would kind of have that same conversation about the strongest people in class 1A, just how she does in canon, but she would still include Deku, but she would kind of focus on his quirk because it's kind of different from others. So she would ask him how does it really work, since at this point in time, the students don't really know each other's quirk too well, since they're all kind of new, and it's not like they go around telling people what their quirk limits are and things like that. So I think Deku would kind of tell them both sides. He would tell them about divine divide and also boosted gear, right? He would basically say that he has the power to not only fly, but he could also divide people's power in half every 10 seconds, but he removes that limit when he uses his balance breaker. And he could also double his power every 10 seconds, and he also can remove that limit if he uses the balance breaker. And he also explains that if he wants to, he could transfer that power to others, since he would get Drake would tell him. And he would also explain some of the extra stuff you could do with divine divide. And Bakugo's listening to this, and he gets angry because he thinks that Deku's kind of been not letting on all of his quirk, since this boosted gear kind of stuff is new to Bakugo and everyone else. Well, not everyone else, since they didn't really know his power before. But Bakugo was like, "You never told me you could double your power whenever you wanted." And Deku was like trying to think of a way to get out of this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess over the years my quirk kind of evolved, and and Bakugo at this point would be furious at him and be like, "So you think I'm so insignificant that you don't need to tell me these things?" Because I think he would get angry, because there is that kind of rivalry between the two, even though it's one-sided in nature. So Deku would be like, "Why does it matter to you? It's not like, why does this rivalry even matter to you? We're like on completely different levels." Because I think he would still be confident, right? Deku would be confident in this and in saying this. And like Bakugo would try to kind of yell at Deku, but he would just kind of ignore it. And this is the point where Todoroki would also be listening, and he would just kind of be annoyed since they're making so much noise, and he kind of wants to stick to himself. So I think at this point Deku would explain to the class that he has 2 dragons living within his quirk or sacred gear. I think to make it simple, he would call them quirk so he wouldn't like kind of confuse them. So yeah, that's what he would call his sacred gear. He would call them quirks, even though they really aren't quirks. They're different. So yeah. And they would be confused, and he would let both Drake and Albion talk to the students. And as this is going on, Aizawa is listening into this conversation, and he's like, "Wow, this is the strangest quirk I've ever heard of, having 2 dragons living within you. But anyways, you guys gotta start behaving. We're gonna be there like in a few minutes." So he tells them to kind of quiet down and get themselves ready to go to the USJ. So when they finally get there, they open the doors, and this is when 13 actually meets them. And this is the point where she kind of does that speech that she does in the anime about how your powers are meant for good, but you gotta remember that if you don't use them correctly, that they could really hurt people, right? And this is when Albion and kind of Drake kind of confirmed this with Deku. Like, they kind of explain things like the what's it called? The Omega. I forgot what it's called, but the kind of giant like dragon that they can become if they like do that chant, right? I forgot what it's called, but I'll remember it soon. But yeah, that's what they're basically telling Deku about it, right? And they're kind of echoing what 13 had said to Deku, and explaining why it's so dangerous. So as the students are looking around, they're looking around the entire USJ, right? And they see different parts you could go to. And before they could actually go to those parts, this is when a giant kind of portal or wormhole I guess it's called a gateway, would open up, this kind of purple gateway, and a bunch of villains would start coming out. This would include Shigaraki and the Nomu. And people would start questioning this, telling Aizawa, like, I thought this was rescue hero work and not, heroes versus villains. And he would tell the class, like, this is not part of the drill, this is an actual attack. And this is when he would launch, or he would jump into battle. And before anyone can really, join, this is when Kurogiri, which is the person who does the warp gates, would kind of surround the students, just how he does in the anime. And since Ida is the one who's like based off speed, they would tell him to go run and get help, since their communications would be jammed. So that's what he would do, and all the other students would just be teleported throughout the kind of the USJ. So it would be Froppy and Deku, because Mineta's not in this since he was kicked out, I believe, if I remember. So Deku would land in that kind of pool of water, and this is when a villain would try to attack him, but before he would get close enough to do so, this was when Suyu or Froppy would actually defend Deku and get him onto the boat, just how they do in canon. So they would kind of discuss on what to do next. And Deku's like, alright, I'll just fly us out of here. And this is when he would activate, well, not really activate, he wouldn't use his balance breaker yet, right? He could just have his normal wings out, since he could just have those out and fly with him. So he would start, charging energy, right? So he would have his boosted gear up at the same time, which would be the gauntlet. And Suyu would kind of question this, right? Because it's the first time she's seen the gauntlet, right? Because he didn't really explain that he had a gauntlet. He just explained the powers. And they already seen the wings from the heroes versus villains kind of assessment and the quirk assessment. So they would know how that looks and how the balance breaker looks. So he would just do that. And he would charge up his boosted gear. And as he does that, he would hear explosion, which means it's at like full capacity, I believe. That's what it means. And he would basically just shoot like a ball of energy into the middle of the kind of lake, just how he does something similar in the anime, to get all the kind of villains within that whirlpool. So what would happen next after this is that Froppy and Deku would get to the kind of shore area, and they would see basically Aizawa and the Nomu fighting, but it's not really a fight. It's basically the Nomu smashing Aizawa into the ground, and he notices this. And before he could react, this is when Shigaraki actually tries to touch Froppy with his hand to kind of like disintegrate her, right? But Deku would kind of push her out of the way, and instinctively he would use his balance breaker. And the way that I think this interaction would go is that he would actually be able to disintegrate parts of the balance breaker. But as you know, or if you don't know, the balance breaker can actually, the balance breaker scale mail can actually regenerate itself. So I think it would disintegrate that part where he touched, and Deku would move away, and it would start to regenerate, right? Because it's not like, it doesn't really hurt Deku because it is like armor, right? Shigaraki would be confused, and he wouldn't really know why he didn't end this kid's life. So he would basically tell the Nomu to kind of fight Deku, right? To go after him. And Deku is just looking at the Aizawa in his like pool of his own blood. This would make him go in a rage, just how he does kind of like how he does in the anime. And all you would hear is just divide. And I think he would divide him like maybe like around 6 or 7 times. So the Nomu would have lost around, I think, like literally 99% of his like actual I don't know the exact math. I know that 5 times is around, I think, 87 something, 87 or 86%, around that. So around 6 or no, I think I know it's in the 90s, right? So he would lose around 90%, in the ballpark of 90% of his overall strength. And it doesn't just necessarily affect his physical strength, this would affect every part of him. So this would affect, it would basically affect every trait except for like physical, because he's not using half dimension. So his shock absorption, regeneration, physical strength, speed, things like that. So then after he would do that, the other voice would start coming through, and it would be Drake's, and he would just say boost, 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 right? And I think he would do it around 5 times or 6, the same amount as Albion, right? So I believe that's around 200, I think 200 times multiplier. No, actually it's like 64 times multiplier. So yeah. So the way that I would think you would, this is how it goes for the power, right? So Albion has a set amount of power he can give someone from Divide. So we're going to have that as his max for Divide, but we're going to have a different limit for the boosted gear. So he can multiply himself at a higher amount, so his power would go higher than just Divide, right? So the reason why you still want Divide is that it gets him to his limit faster, because if you have a higher number when you multiply it, or boosted gear works better with a bigger number at the beginning, right? So that's why they're kind of separated, because they do different things. So after Deku would be charged up, he would basically, his gauntlet would just say explosion, and he would just shoot a kind of magical beam or a magical blast. That's how like Issei does with his like normal gauntlet. I forgot what the actual name of it's called, but you know what I mean. But this blast would be so powerful that it would basically disintegrate the Nomu, leaving base almost no trace of it. There's like barely any ashes of it, because it's like nearly gone. And I think the blast radius would be so large that Shigaraki would get hurt just from the pure shockwave itself hitting the Nomu. And Shigaraki would be very he would be losing his mind at this point, right? He would be viciously scratching his neck and saying that this isn't fair, you cheated, why does this thing have to happen to me? And he's kind of having this like temper tantrum, right? And as this is happening, this is when the other heroes actually show up, and Snipe actually comes through and does how he does in the anime and shoots 4 bullets, and this actually injures Shigaraki, and he tells Kurogiri to kind of get him out of there, which he does, right? So Shigaraki and Kurogiri would escape, leaving basically everyone else, all the other heroes, or no, not the heroes, the other villains, to kind of fend for themselves, right? So as that would be going down, Deku would help kind of pick up Aizawa, since he's very injured at this point. Not as injured as he would be in canon, since he didn't have to activate his quirk for a second time, and the Nomu wouldn't have to come back and like beat on him some more. And as he's like getting help from Suyu or Froppy kind of carrying his body, this is when Froppy would ask, like, when did the color of your like suit change to pink? And Deku, not realizing, because he was in the heat of the moment, that his balance breaker is kind of pink/purple, and he would kind of be embarrassed by this. And then this is when Froppy would be like, oh yeah, I kind of get it, red dragon mixed with white what would you get? Pink. And Deku kind of plays it off like, haha, yeah, I guess so. And he's still kind of embarrassed, but he gets, Aizawa back, to safety to medical care. So, I think I'll end it here, and then I'll have that kind of, that poll on this video, and things like that, right? So, before I end this off, I would like to give a big shout out to Kid Zeus. He's part of the Sins. He was a longtime fan of mine. Well, he was there basically at the beginning of my channel, and he is the first member of the Sins to actually reach 1,000 subscribers. So I would like to give a big shout out to him. I'm very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers soon. The sooner we get there, I have something very special planned for 1,000. So the sooner we get there, the sooner I could enact that plan. So not only that, but I could also include the community tab and things like that, right? So with that being said, this is going to be the end of the video. So yeah,